Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to be here today. There we go, that's better. So welcome everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here and to speak to you today. And thank you for showing up in such great numbers, because I'm really encouraged by that and look forward to the discussions. I'm going to try to pick up where Christian left. I think after an excellent introduction of the seafood certification landscape and some of the history behind it. Before moving forward, just to emphasize a couple of key points that Christian made, and I think also are very relevant to the topic that I'm going to speak today about the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative and ensuring confidence in certified seafood. First of all, certification is a tool. It's not a goal in itself. It's a tool to provide verification and to communicate towards the market that fisheries or aquaculture are managed in a responsible and a sustainable way. But it starts with responsible fisheries management. So it's simply a tool to translate and independently verify that that is in place. Also, I think Christian provided a good overview of why responsible fisheries management is important and how these programs came about historically in the past. I think looking forward, responsible fisheries management, responsible practices in aquaculture maintain a critical issue in the seafood supply chain. I think we've all seen some of these figures of FAO, that the fish consumption has doubled more than since the 1960s, and there's actually predictions that we need another 30 million metric tons of seafood in the next 15 years to meet increasing consumer demands. The only way to do that is by managing our fisheries responsible and sustainable, ensuring healthy productions of our oceans, ensuring jobs and economic profitability. And the same accounts for aquaculture, which needs to ensure that we capture a lot of that needed growth with limited resources that we have. And as said, certification can be a tool to help us get there, as it is a tool that can tell us and verify whether these practices are being conducted in a credible way. It's also, as Christian said, more and more important. The markets are aware of this. Consumers are concerned about these issues, which translates into retailers setting their requirements and saying, we want to contribute towards these issues. We want to also make sure as a retailer that we can be sure that we have enough supply of seafood in the future. So we are concerned about sustainable management of the fisheries, and we want to have a system in place that can help us distinguish between well-managed fisheries and lesser managed fisheries, and then help lesser managed fisheries to move towards well-managed fisheries and have credible systems in place to check that. Christian talked about one certification program, and over time, as this has become a more important issue, more and more certification programs have developed. This left many players in the seafood sector with the questions, okay, which of these programs that supposedly need to tell us which fisheries are managed in a responsible way can we actually trust? Who tells what they do and who actually does what they tell them? In this discussion and confusion, I'd like to make another separation between certification and eco-labeling, which are often used in the same sentences, which are often actually used as interchangeable terms, but they're not. Certification is the process of verification that a specific standard is met, whether that is food safety, whether that is food quality, whether that is sustainability. Eco-labeling is the communication about certain product qualities through a seal, a package, anything. And again, that could be on a variety of issues. Labeling can be done without the verification of certification. Then, of course, the question of credibility becomes a very serious one. Certification can be done without labeling. But when we talk about ensuring, having in place mechanisms to tell us and make decisions as buyers or suppliers of responsible seafood, the verification bit, the certification bit is most important. That tells us whether certain fisheries are managed in a responsible way. So over time, because of the importance of this issue, because of the requirements that have emerged in markets for certification and eco-labeling, confusion has occurred. There's one of the retailers that I work with they're active in 30 countries, and their buyers were presented with over 140 different labels. Not all of those were certifications, but all of those pretended to make a claim saying something about the sustainability of a certain fishery or aquaculture product. So in order for businesses to work efficiently, we need to provide some clarity in this space. As Christian explained, in the seafood industry we're actually lucky because we have a document that has been developed and approved by 180 governments called the Eco-Labeling Guidelines for Marine or Inland Captured Fisheries and the Technical Guidelines for Aquaculture Certification. And those guidelines provide us with the essential components of a robust standard and a credible certification scheme. So when these guidelines were developed, there were many, actually major retailers that said, we like that. If the FAO, through their stakeholder process, has developed these guidelines and told us this is what we need from a robust standard and a credible certification scheme, then we'd like to implement that. If a scheme, as Christian said, follows the FAO guidelines, we'd like to work with those schemes. So they asked FAO, so can you please tell us who meets your guidelines? And this is where it became a little bit difficult, because this is where FAO had to say, we cannot do that. Legally, we're not allowed. So how do we solve that problem? And this is this issue was raised already back in 2001 at an OECD meeting in The Hague. I believe Christian was there. I don't know, Alistair might have been there or not. It took a couple of years, and then in 2012, a group of retailers came together with FAO, with some NGOs, and said, if FAO is not going to do it, then we need to set up an initiative that can do that for us. This initiative needs to be credible, objective, and neutral. It needs to contain the views of different stakeholders and be based on consensus. It needs to be global. So this is where the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative was set up, with the aim to be the first non-competitive approach to provide clarity and transparency towards seafood certification by benchmarking against the FAO Eco-Labeling Guidelines. This is actually not a new process. It's not unique to seafood. A similar thing has happened in food safety 10 years ago. So we were lucky enough to, when we started this initiative, to be able to build on an internationally recognized framework of what we were supposed to benchmark against, and B, a lot of experience in a different sector, food safety, on how to actually do the benchmark. Still, it took about 3 years to take that document of FAO, the guidelines, and translate that into what we now call the GSSI Global Benchmark. The reason why it took that long is because the guidelines are guidelines. They're negotiated language, and sometimes in order to make that applicable in measurable criteria and benchmark indicators, you need to specify these issues. We also needed to make sure that what we were writing down was acceptable, so we did many consultations over 3 years across the globe We had involvement of many of the existing programs, including the Icelandic program and the Alaskan program, in verifying that the way this tool was set up was workable. And in 2015, at the 20th anniversary of the Code of Conduct, together with FAO, we've launched the GSSI benchmark. So what did that mean? That means that from that day on, certification schemes can come to GSSI and ask GSSI to independently verify whether they meet the components of the FAO guidelines. Now, this is important to understand that the GSSI process is a voluntary process. We cannot go out and try assess all these 140 different programs. No, it's up to the programs to come to GSSI and be tested. The reason why is because we go in great depth and detail, and we need the collaboration of the programs. What we look at, and we've heard many terms in my presentation and in Christian's presentation: robust standards, credible certification. So we really look at three core components of a certification scheme. Of course, we look at whether the contents of the standard, as Christian said, apply the minimum substantive requirements as described in the FAO guidelines. We also look whether the verification process, the operational components of the scheme, are independent, third party, and in compliance with international standards of ISO. So this is independent certification, independent accreditation, assurance of chain of custody. So making sure that if you make a claim in relation to the certification, it's actually coming from a certified entity. And thirdly, we look at the responsibilities of scheme owners, so the governance of the whole process. Making sure that there is transparency, that there is stakeholder input, in order to make sure that in the end, if a scheme is meeting all these components, it can truly be considered robust and credible, and that suppliers that wish to get certified can trust these programs that they deliver on their premises, that retailers and food service companies can use these programs in their sourcing policies and can trust that these programs really do what they say they do. Very short about our process, and I encourage you to have a look at the website if you want more detail about it, but the GSSI process of benchmarking itself is quite an extensive process. Scheme owners come to us, apply for recognition. Our experts will look at all the information provided, first on a desktop basis, later at the office with the scheme to really check whether the procedures they have in place are actually followed. The report is reviewed by an independent committee. There is a public consultation where anybody could raise their concerns about this process or provide additional information. And finally, if a scheme meets all the components of the standard, the operational management and the governance, it receives recognition by GSSI and will be published on our website. And by all the components, just to give you an indication, we look across about 150 different components in these different sections of the tool. So this is quite an elaborate exercise. The last 2 days we've been working together with the Marine Ecolabel Japan in an initial step to explore how they are currently meeting these requirements and providing information how to move forward, so they can tell you all about the rigor of the process, and I think we hear maybe a little bit about that in the next presentation of one of the programs that actually has gone through this process. So this is all nice, and sort of these were the objectives to that GSSI was set out to do. Our tool is working. So where are we now today? Last year, GSSI recognized 2 certification schemes, and those are the first to be recognized internationally, meeting the FAO Ecolabel guidelines. The Alaska RFM program, which we hear from later, and the Icelandic Responsible Fisheries program. The MSc program is in the final stages of the benchmark process and just finished its public consultation program. There's a number of programs that are in the process of going through this process, which include aquaculture programs. Commitments have been made by programs to meet the standards of GSSI and prove to the marketplace that they are in alignment with these international guidelines of FAO and are credible and robust programs that can be used. So this is one thing, schemes being recognized and proving their credibility. But that doesn't mean anything if the market is not accepting it, because some of the problems that Christian described really come from different requirements in different markets. For producers, this means if you're in aquaculture in Asia, you probably are certified 3-4 different times in order to meet the different demands of retailers in Europe, in America, because they all want their own little program and certification. What we see now is that actually major retailers, instead of requiring one specific certification scheme, they accept the programs that meet the FAO guidelines and are benchmarked and recognized by GSSI. And this is what Christian was referring to with equivalence. As there's equivalence, there's a lot of interpretations of the word, so it's not a word that we use, but it's essentially, we've seen Metro Group, a major retailer, one of the top 10 retailers globally, has in their 2020 policy that they want to have certified seafood, and that seafood needs to come from a GSSI recognized program. Ahold has another, I think, 5th largest retailer in the world, does the same. Kroger, Darden restaurants, so many companies are currently including this in their policies, and it's growing. So this is creating a level playing field, an option of choice in certification for suppliers and producers, which ultimately will make sure that the certification processes are effective and efficient and will drive down costs for suppliers by reducing the need of having multiple certifications and ensuring competition between different certification programs. Moving forward in this year, we will see that more certification programs will come forward. There's a number of programs in the process, but also we'll see further commitments of companies using the GSSI in their sourcing policies and relying on GSSI in giving them advice and ensuring confidence in certification. We've seen that this process has actually driven improvement in certification programs, making sure they live up to the FAO guidelines and that they can prove their independence and credibility. And we can see that the GSSI partnership of companies and NGOs that we work with is growing. So this is actually already an outdated picture of the companies that currently support GSSI. And they all work together in this platform and forum on a non-competitive basis to address these sustainability issues. They want to ensure confidence in certified seafood. They want to drive and ensure that they source from well-managed fisheries and enforce the implementation of the FAO guidelines and the code of conduct. And also, there's an opportunity through the GSSI platform that we can continue to work together on these important issues and try to make sure that we provide leadership in addressing some of these key challenges that we have and making sure that we have enough seafood for everyone in the future to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman, for explaining GSSI and its pioneering approach to operationalizing FAO guidelines. And now I would like to take a couple of questions. Since his presentation ended quite early, so we have a lot of time, so I encourage you to have questions. 日本語でも構いませんので。
Thank you for very informative presentations. My name is Masanori Kobayashi from the Ocean Policy Research Institute in Tokyo. I'm curious about the view about this need for certification and the need for validation and recognition of certifications. I see many companies I presume that they're based in Europe or North America, but I think the seafood consumptions may be growing in Asia or Africa, and where probably the seafood certification would be highly needed. And I'm just wondering whether you have a kind of programs to rather assist the private companies or retailers in developing countries to have access to the certifications or the validation of the seafood certifications. And I also wondered whether you have programs to allow, for instance, consumer groups, for instance, in Japan, to ask GSSI to validate these certification schemes. You mentioned that it has to be voluntary basis, but whether such a request can be made, not by the fishery association, but maybe by the consumer group, for instance.
So I think a number of issues here. In terms of the last question, only certification schemes can apply to be recognized, because as Asmi or FM will tell, or Iceland, Christian can tell from Iceland, if we do this process, we have to go to the office of the certification scheme. We have to look into their procedures. So if a certification scheme is not willing to cooperate, we can't do the benchmarking. In terms of your question related to developing countries, I think that's a very important and valid question. In the development process of the benchmark tool, GSSI has been supported by the German Development Corporation, GIZ, and we've been working closely with FAO. So throughout this process, we have had a number of consultations and meetings, workshops in developing countries. In particular, we've had workshops in Africa, Southeast Asia. In particular, Southeast Asia, there's a lot of developments around certification in aquaculture. In the pilot testing that we conducted before launching the tool, we worked very closely with the national programs in Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia to help them explain how this works and what they could do to improve their programs. And moving forward, this is something that GSSI will continue to work on and probably will have to strengthen. It's also, GSSI needed to start first with, we needed to set up the program, and we have recognized now a number of certification schemes. So now we can see that actually programs are looking at this to get advice and understand how can they improve their programs to meet the international demands. In terms of the other question you raised, seafood consumption is growing in, a lot of it is growing in developing countries. I think consumers there are maybe less aware on these issues. But if you look at the seafood industry, major global companies are supplying seafood, not only in Western countries, but also into these developing markets. And really what is certification, coming back to my first point, it's not a goal in itself. It's a tool to help us tell whether or not fisheries are managed sustainably. And we need to manage our fisheries well in order to make sure that we have supply into the future. So there is an inherent, the underlying effort that we're working towards is well-managed fisheries to ensure supply into the future. And certification is one of the tools that can help doing that if it's robust and credible. And I think the demand will continue to grow, and it will help companies to drive fisheries in the right direction.
Maybe one more question? There is one. Okay, thank you very much, Herman. Now we would like to welcome Ms. Hannah Linder from Alaska Seafood Market Institute.
very much. My name is Anna Lindoff, and I am the International Marketing Director at the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, or as we call it, ASIM. And who we are at the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, we are a public-private partnership between the state of Alaska and the Alaska seafood industry. We are governed by a governor-appointed board of directors at 5 of our major processors, and then 2 officials who are on our board. And we are the official marketing arm for the state of Alaska. And ASME itself runs several different programs. We have in the United States, we run a marketing program, which is what we do is we market to consumers, to retailers, to food service operators. And then in the international marketing program, we do the same thing in 27 of our key markets abroad, including here in Japan, in China, Brazil, Western Europe, and Eastern Europe. We have a technical program, which is our scientific research program. That's where we get nutritional information about all our seafood and we create our technical materials. In the Global Food Aid Program, we work with international aid organizations to supply good value, shelf-stable Alaska seafood products to different aid organizations. And then we also have the Alaska RFM program. And I want to say I am not with the RFM program. I'm the director of the international program. But we have to work very closely because RFM has always been mostly an international issue. And a lot of what my presentation is about today will echo some of what you've already heard, but maybe you'll see it a little differently because I come from the marketing side, and so I have a little bit of a different slant on things about how they play out in the marketplace. This is an interesting subject for me too because, I want to first recognize the ASME Japan program. This is our most traditional market, and this is a very important market for Alaska seafood. This is our largest marketing program, and it is an honor to be here and to talk with the Japanese people about our products and our program because we have so many long ties to the Japanese market. And one of our favorite things to do is to bring press and chefs to Alaska so that they can witness the majesty of our fishing grounds and our sustainability. I know some people here in this room have had an opportunity to do that. So now, moving into the RFM program. In my first week that I worked for ASME, in 2008, we held a symposium, somewhat like this one, in Anchorage. And the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which was at the time the client for Alaska Salmon with the MSC, announced that they no longer wanted to take that role and that they would no longer pay to be part of the MSC certification. So this was in 2008, and this was my first week. But it was at that moment that I believe the germ of the seed of the idea that has become now the robust RFM certification is born. And I had the privilege of seeing the RFM program evolve and play out in the marketplace through my career at ASME. And I worked for 5 years as a European marketing coordinator. So I was right there in the battleground for sustainable fisheries, particularly in the UK market and in the German market. We have seen this play out, and I think we've come to a very happy result, which I will talk about in this presentation. So I wanted to ground the beginning of the RFM presentation with this map of Alaska, just so that we are remembering the broad scope and the geographical mass of Alaska. We are very big, we are very few people. We have just over 700,000, but we are about 1/5 of the United States. We have 60% of the seafood caught in the United States is coming out of Alaska. And we're very proud of this. We like to say everything's bigger in Alaska. So one of the things that Alaska is most proud of is our robust fisheries management. And what is important to observe here when you're looking at this slide is that all the entities involved in fisheries management in Alaska, there is no single entity in charge of management for any one species. So you want to look at how it might work for one species. You can look at crab, and you can see conservation and management is done by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Policy and allocation is done by the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and then regulatory and enforcement is done here by the National Fisheries Service and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. So you have national and state entities involved in the management of our fisheries, and there's always checks and balances because no one agency oversees everything in managing our fisheries. So to drill down and show you how this works, you can have a look here at the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands groundfish catch limits. Very quickly, here is the biomass, the parent fish that we were talking about earlier. The TAC is the total allowable catch. That is the number that the scientists or that the managers say that we can catch. The ABC is the allowable biological catch. Anyway, so you can see that we set the total allowable catch well below this line where the scientists might say we could catch that many, and far, far below the biomass that is out there. So the state of Alaska takes sustainability very seriously, and we take our fish very seriously. When Alaska became a state, which was in 1959, a lot of the push for statehood was actually so that we could have control of our own fisheries. So sometimes we say we were founded on fish.